On the afternoon of June 23, 2022, a 15-year-old girl stepped out of an Uber outside a movie theater in Chicago. She wasn't running away, she wasn't being reckless. In her mind, she was walking toward safety, toward a man who had spent years promising her the one thing she said she didn't have at home, someone who wouldn't hurt her. She would not be seen again for almost 4 years. When she was finally found, 730 miles away, in a small house in Blacksburg, Virginia, it wasn't because a detective cracked the case. It was because a police officer, responding to a completely unrelated domestic disturbance call, happened to knock on the right door. This is the case of Joniah Walker, and it's a case that raises an uncomfortable question that her own family has been asking publicly for 4 years. What exactly were the police doing while she was gone? Joniah Walker grew up on Brown Street in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Like a lot of teenagers, she had a phone, social media accounts, and a life that existed partly online, out of view of the adults around her. According to the criminal complaint later filed against her alleged abductor, that online life is where everything started, years before she ever got in that car. Investigators say Joniah first began communicating with a man named Owen Anderson when she was just 12 years old. He was, at that point, in his early 30s. The platforms weren't unusual for a kid her age: Discord, Kik, Signal. What was unusual, according to the complaint, was what Anderson allegedly did with the access those apps gave him. He didn't rush. Investigators say the relationship was built slowly, over years, with Anderson positioning himself as the person in her life who understood her, who wouldn't scream at her, wouldn't hit her, would take care of her. If that sounds like a script, it's because it is one. It's one of the oldest scripts in online grooming. Identify a kid who feels unsafe or unheard at home, and offer to be the safe alternative. The complaint alleges Joniah had told Anderson about struggles with abuse in her home life, and that he used that disclosure as leverage, positioning himself as the opposite of everything she said she was afraid of. At one point, according to the complaint, Anderson asked her to send a video of herself performing an explicit act, allegedly framing it as proof that she wasn't secretly working with police. It's a manipulation tactic that shows up again and again in online exploitation cases. Turn the victim's fear of getting caught into a tool that isolates her further and makes it harder for her to ever come forward. By June of 2022, whatever Anderson had built with her over 3 years of messaging was apparently enough. He arranged an Uber. She took it, from Milwaukee to Chicago, to meet him outside a movie theater. She was 15 years old. Joniah's father knew almost immediately that something was wrong. Her mother would later describe the moment plainly. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and she knew right away it was just off. For most parents, a silent phone is an inconvenience. For the Walkers, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch on for 4 years. What followed was a missing persons case that, by the family's account, moved with almost no urgency at all. Relatives went to local Milwaukee news outlets to plead for help, and to voice a frustration that would come up again and again over the following years. They felt like they were investigating their own daughter's disappearance. One relative put it bluntly to reporters: everybody on that block had a Ring camera. The family said they were the ones who gathered the doorbell footage showing the last time Joniah was seen, not the police. Another family member described being treated less like grieving parents and more like suspects, saying no one sat them down, no one really interviewed them, that it felt like it was the family against the police department with a glass between us. Milwaukee police, for their part, have consistently declined to go into detail about how the investigation was actually run. Even now, after Joniah has been found, a police spokesperson would only say, in writing, that there was no reason to believe she'd been the victim of human trafficking. That's a strange hill to plant a flag on, considering the actual charges filed once she was recovered: kidnapping, child enticement, abduction of a child. Whatever label you want to put on it, a 12-year-old was targeted online, and a 15-year-old was taken and held for 4 years. Meanwhile, according to the complaint, Anderson took his own steps to make sure the phone that had alerted her family would never lead anyone to her. Records state he disposed of Joniah's cell phone, along with a burner phone he'd apparently given her to use instead, in a sidewalk trash can. A small, almost mundane detail, and also, effectively, the last trace of her that existed for 4 years. According to the criminal complaint, from late June of 2022 through May of 2026, Joniah Walker was held at Owen Anderson's residence in Blacksburg, Virginia. Investigators allege she was not allowed to attend school. She was, according to the complaint, physically and sexually abused throughout that period. Perhaps the most haunting detail in the entire case comes directly from her own words to investigators after she was found. Describing why she didn't try to escape or reach out for help, she reportedly told them, "It's always my fault if he hits me." That single sentence tells you almost everything you need to know about how coercive control works. It's not always chains and locked doors, although investigators say there were weapons in the home when Anderson was eventually arrested. It's a psychological architecture built over years, starting when a target is barely old enough to understand what's happening to her. By the time physical abuse enters the picture, the victim has often already been trained to blame herself for it. When investigators later searched Anderson's home, they say they recovered electronic devices, flash drives, and journals connected to Joniah, a kind of documentation trail that will likely become central to the prosecution's case once it reaches trial. For 4 years, none of that was visible from the outside. To whatever neighbors existed around that small frame house in Blacksburg, there was apparently nothing to see. Here's the part of this story that should unsettle you almost as much as anything else in it. Joniah Walker was not found because of a tip. She wasn't found because of a break in the 4-year investigation. She was found because, on May 25, 2026, a law enforcement officer responded to a completely unrelated 911 call about a domestic disturbance and encountered her in the process. Investigators say that contact was what finally set the wider machinery in motion. Milwaukee detectives traveled out of state. They followed up on what by then was described as a long trail of tips that had apparently been trickling in for years without producing a result. And 10 days after that chance encounter, formal charges were filed against Owen Anderson: kidnapping, child enticement, and abduction of a child. He was arrested, booked into the Western Virginia Regional Jail on a charge of kidnapping a person under 16. As of the most recent reporting, he remains in custody there and has not yet been extradited to face the Wisconsin charges, meaning the legal process that will actually test these allegations in court hasn't even formally begun. Joniah Walker is 19 years old now. She spent more of her adolescence in that house in Virginia than she did as a free teenager in Milwaukee. So where does that leave this case? With Owen Anderson, it leaves a set of serious felony charges and, so far, silence. No court appearance yet, no defense on record, no trial date. Everything the public knows about his alleged actions comes from one document: the criminal complaint. That's worth remembering before anyone, including me, treats these allegations as settled fact. With Milwaukee police, it leaves an uncomfortable set of questions the department doesn't seem eager to answer. Why did a family have to source their own doorbell footage? Why does an official spokesperson, in the same breath as confirming years of sexual and physical abuse, feel the need to specifically push back on the word trafficking, a distinction that, to most people watching this case, is going to sound less like precision and more like damage control? And with the broader pattern here, a predator identifying a vulnerable 12-year-old online, grooming her for 3 years before ever meeting her in person, it leaves the same question true crime keeps circling back to: case after case, how many more of these relationships are being built right now, in comment sections and DMs, invisible to every adult who should be watching? Joniah Walker is alive. That's the outcome nobody could guarantee for 4 years, and it's not nothing. But alive and resolved are not the same word. The court case is just beginning. The police department's role in a 4-year search is still largely unexamined. And somewhere in that gap between what happened and what anyone's been held accountable for, that's where this story actually lives right now. Anderson hasn't even been arraigned yet. When he does step into a courtroom, I'll be covering it. Subscribe if you want to see where this actually goes.